Hello, fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I'd like to chat about the Odd Women Readalong that Katie and I are hosting. It's the halfway point of the read-along now, probably a bit more so by the time this gets posted, and I just wanted to touch base with you and share some of my thoughts. Originally, I wanted to vlog every single day as I read the 2 chapters, but that just did not work out for me. I apparently find it very difficult to set up and sit in front of this camera every day for a certain period of time. So instead, I wrote down my thoughts after each chapter, and I'll share those with you in a little bit. But I just wanted to briefly thank everyone who's participating in this read-along for a moment. Thank you for reading this with us and posting such insightful comments on the Goodreads group and on my Instagram posts. This book is absolutely amazing as it is, but you are all contributing to a very special reading experience for me. And just knowing that there's a whole group of people out there reading the same chapters I am each day brings me a lovely sense of comfort and community. So thank you, and for those who may not be reading along, if you're watching this book is absolutely amazing so far. It feels very modern and ahead of its time when it comes to the subject of gender. The plot is quick and fast-paced, and the characters and the positions they hold in society are so nuanced and fascinating. I know it's called The Odd Women, but all the characters are odd in the sense that they don't neatly fit into an accepted Victorian class, and watching them navigate their unique social landscapes and their fluidity of class is so intriguing. So far, this book has just been a wonderful balance of plot and character development and passionate philosophical discourse. So if you haven't been reading along with us, it is not too late to start. This book is absolutely amazing. I think I've said that already, and I can't urge people enough to read it with us. In my personal life, I've been trying to convince my friends, many of whom aren't prolific readers, to join in with this read-along, to varying degrees of success, of course, but I've become a bit obsessed with the read-along, and I find myself discussing this book in casual conversation. So I'd like to go into a chapter-by-chapter discussion of this book, and I will read from my little diary here where I've been jotting down my thoughts as I go. So the rest of the video will probably be mostly for people joining in with the read-along who've been following along, because there are going to inevitably be some spoilers here. Not to worry if you aren't reading along with us and don't want spoilers. I will definitely be discussing this book a lot more in a spoiler-free fashion on this channel when the read-along has concluded. So, on we go. The first 2 chapters of this book had me worried a bit. I had no issues with Gissing's writing style, but the first 2 chapters focused on Alice and Virginia and their depressive and pathetic existences. It portrayed such a bleak view of unmarried life, and I truly worried that this was the stance the book was going to take on spinsters and Victorian society. I didn't care to read an entire book exclusively focused on Alice and Virginia, and I was afraid they were going to be the focal characters of this book, but luckily I kept reading and I found the rest of the book to be far more uplifting, or at least nuanced in its portrayal of spinsters. Seriously, reading chapter 3 and being introduced to Rhoda was a true breath of fresh air. In similar circumstances to the Madden sisters, she adapted and she took action and invested in herself. She saw that she couldn't obtain the positions she wanted to in the workplace, and so she learned skills to survive and thrive. Monica and her situation was also introduced in these chapters, and she is so much younger than the rest of the characters that she seems to be at a crossroads. Goes on as she is, she's bound to end up like them, or in an early grave, or giving way to a working class marriage with someone who doesn't support her, although that one doesn't seem so likely. Chapters 5 and 6. So the interaction with Mr. Widowson made me feel very uncomfortable. It seemed most improper, and it even felt dangerous and unwise to my modern day sensibilities. His background seems interesting enough, but what did he want from Monica? It was a little hard to make out. Did he want friendship? Was he looking for a mistress? A wife? I guess he could just be a lonely, friendless man who is willing to completely disregard social decency. I don't know, all interactions with Mr. Widowson seem incredibly problematic in their own way. I'm just really skeptical of him for Monica. His background, though, is really interesting because both him and Monica are straddling class lines and they don't really properly fit anywhere into society. Rhoda and Miss Barfoot's discussion and banter was wonderful. I love their relationship. Rhoda is incredibly extreme and her ideas are so radical in their feminism, or proto-feminism, because feminism wasn't officially a thing at that point in time, but her ideas are just so far ahead of their time, and in a way that's alienating to their cause. Because she's so extreme, it's hard for her to garner support from everyone. Most women in the society do want to marry, whether Rhoda approves of it or not. And she's of the opinion that anyone with their education should be self-sufficient and should see no purpose in marriage. And so many other women just have a hard time grasping that concept when it's so far from the societal norm. And of course, I completely love Miss Barfoot. She might be my favorite character so far. Her sense of purpose is just as extreme as Rhoda's, but her ideas are a little less extreme, or so it seems. There's an interesting tension that forms here of that intersection between class and gender. Should they only help people of genteel birth, or should they extend a helping hand to everyone and make it their mission for all women to become self-sufficient? That's interesting. I seem to not have written anything at all for chapters 7 and 8. I'm not quite sure why. Let's move on to 9 and 10. Chapters 9 and 10. So in chapter 9, we are introduced to Mr. Everard Barfoot. What a name and what a character. His past does not recommend him. I will just say that. A lot of the language used to describe his past is reminiscent of today's rape culture, and it's really interesting how he tries to get sympathy for himself as the victim of the situation. So enough said about that. Moving on to what he plans to do in the future, he has a plot to seduce Rhoda just for fun, just to see if she can hold to her principles. It's despicable, really it is. He views her beliefs as a turn on or a challenge, and it quite sickens me to think of this challenge of his. I did find it odd that they happen to agree about some things, and even though Everard is misogynistic and seems to be a terrible person, it's really interesting to listen to him talk to Rhoda. Chapter 11. So in chapter 11, Rhoda goes on this massive tirade against Monica's upbringing, and she says how Monica has been damaged by her sister's uselessness, and they raised her half a lady, half a shop girl, which in some ways is true. She does not really fit into either category of class, and that's what makes her so interesting and so troubled in society, really. But basically, Rhoda writes her off as a silly girl good for nothing but marriage. And I was truly hoping that Rhoda was incorrect and being too harsh on Monica. I hoped that Monica was a more nuanced character than that and a more complex character than that. But then she agreed to marry Mr. Widowson. She gave in, and it seems really odd considering the improper way in which they met. And now she convinces herself that she loves him when, to the reader and to Millie, it does not seem like she loves him at all. And I worry that Millie is absolutely correct about the whole situation with Monica, and that Monica will regret this decision. But we'll just have to wait and see. Chapter 12. So chapter 12 is a wonderful chapter. There are 2 weddings, 2 marriages, and it seems like we are supposed to compare and contrast them, that is why they're both there in the same chapter. There is the marriage of the Widowsons and the marriage of the Micklethwaites. I love that name. It's so fun. And then we also meet Mrs. Luke, who is just a little too much. She's superficial, she's very practical, clearly, though, when it comes to marriage, and class and upward mobility. And she would obviously have Mr. Widowson marry someone who brings something to his advantage. Most likely society, good society, because that's really what he's lacking, although he could use extra money too, I'm sure. And Mr. Micklethwaite, it seems, is also marrying without advantage. They describe his bride as faded, and having no society or money. She comes with a blind sister. It's clearly not a marriage that has any benefits besides each other's company. And I think that's great, but obviously, if marriage is a vehicle for social mobility, this is not the kind of marriage you want to enter into. Monica, however, has entered into that sort of a marriage. She definitely gains something from the marriage to Mr. Widowson. They're on unequal footing in some senses. He only gets her companionship, but she gets companionship and money and financial security and the means to support her sisters if she wants to. Chapters 13 and 14. In this set of chapters, we get to see a little more of Everard and Rhoda's relationship, and it is really fascinating. I love hearing them talk with each other, and Everard says that it's probably all part of his sick joke, but at points you really wonder, is he falling for Rhoda? Does he actually like her? Because he seems to really get along with her. Not to mention his idea of a free union. That is profoundly radical for the time period. And as radical as Rhoda is that something she would approve of or even find necessary? It would just be interesting to hear her thoughts on that. I'm tempted to think that Mr. Barfoot, Mr. Everard Barfoot, is just a scoundrel and he just wants an excuse for a lack of commitment in life. But if he really does believe in all of that free union stuff that he speaks about, he may be as radical as Rhoda and may be an interesting match for her in some ways. And then there's Miss Barfoot's inspired speech. It's fascinating the way she talks about women invading the men's sphere and redefining what it means to be a woman. She calls for a social revolution. She actually even uses those words. I think there may be some other words interspersed between them, but social and revolution are definitely in there. And this is just very advanced for its time. I can't even fathom writing this at that time period. Not to mention, a woman didn't write this, a man did. And I now want to learn more about George Gissing. This is the first Gissing book that I've read at all. But for him to write something like this in the Victorian time period is something special. So yes. It's also interesting, though, that Miss Barfoot does not state that men and women are equal, and in fact, she actually speaks against it, or rather dismisses it as completely irrelevant. Instead, she argues that oppression against women must end, that their natural growth has been stunted, and the implication is that it has been stunted by the men, but she doesn't care about what happens to the men, she just wants the women to be freed. And so that is really interesting. I worry greatly about Rhoda being softened by Everard because at this point I still view him as a rakish figure and I have no reason to see him otherwise. And that's all I've read so far. Today I will read chapters 15 and 16 because I am filming this on May 8th and those are today's chapters. So I will get to them. I might try harder in the second half of this read along to do a day-by-day vlog, but don't hold your breath. There's a chance I might just do another one of these at the end, or perhaps a collaboration with Katie. I probably will do that. So are you participating in this read along? How have you been getting on with the Odd Women? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts about the book or anything that I've said or any of its themes in the comments down below. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you in another video very soon. Bye!